There is Chief Design Officer. I direct the user researchers, interaction designers, information architects there. Dan's title is Experience Research Director, so is really kind of focused on our research area. And we're here today to talk to you about, I don't know if we're trademarking a term, probably not, but usefulness as compared to usability and the method to kind of gauge the usefulness of your designs. So this kind of came about, Dan and I both had a great experience at the Bentley Human Factors program. And there we were trained on usability testing, how to do it right, what the implications are, etc. Which is great. Like I said, we both had a great experience there. As we've been working together on various projects, we've been getting requests to do usability testing. But the actual questions that our business stakeholders have are not maybe usability. It's a kind of a mishmash of user needs analysis, usability, marketing, all kind of jumbled into one. And so this talk is our attempt to kind of make sense of that and have a dialogue about that. So we'll see how this goes. So with that, I'd just like to get a sense of the audience here. Show of hands, people who've done usability testing. Great, pretty much everybody, which is why we're here at the usability conference, which is what we expected. We're still going to, we're not going to go into the basics of usability testing, but we will kind of level set with everybody so that we are all on the same page in terms of what we were talking about. And speaking of level setting, when we talk about usability testing, you know, there's lots of nuances, a remote roundup in usability testing, comparative and baseline, all this other stuff. But essentially what we're talking about is having participants try to complete tasks with a particular design and learning by observing them and listening to them and what they say. This isn't listening to people what they want necessarily, that's part of it, but by observing and watching me learn what works and what doesn't work. And I was fortunate enough when I went through the Bentley program to have as my mentor Joe Dumas, who's one of the authors of one of the foundational books on usability testing. And it was a great experience because he'd done so many usability tests over the course of his career that he could really help me in learning how to do this, to really focus on what are we minimizing in terms of distractions or trying to force reality on this or something to get at what are the usability problems, somebody trying to get from point A to point B or do something, and it was great. So in those classes, we also talked about how many participants you have and all the issues around how usability testing works. I don't see a lot of this debate as much these days, but 5 or 10 years ago, or I don't know the exact date on this study here, but as usability testing was being defined, it's like how many people do we need per group? The thing that I really take from this is what I learned from Joe in the foundational things is usability testing is about finding usability problems, right? So this whole debate was about how many people do you need to test with to get the best return on the number of problems that you're finding. There's a whole number of Q studies and other things that looked at what are the best methods and the most efficient and how consistent are we at finding usability problems. So that's how we think of usability testing. But as I mentioned at the beginning, when we're going to do projects for people, and I see some clients in the room here actually, the questions are not necessarily about what are the usability problems. They're more related to strategy, to value, to what we are calling usefulness. And it kind of plays into the name that we have in our title. So Dan is Experienced Director, Experienced Designers. We're not just about usability, we're about the entire experience. Usability is one part of that, but delivering value, aligning with people's workflow, offering something that's going to be sticky or engaging or contribute to the brand, all those types of things, as I said, a mishmash of marketing, needs analysis, usability, experience. So just to give you some examples of that, and this plays out across any number of different kinds of designs or properties. And we're going to take you through a couple of those just so that we're all clear about what we're talking about. So, Dan to start.
So just as in with usability, in what we're calling usefulness, the questions are going to differ based on the what we're looking at. So what we have now are a couple of examples of different types of applications and comparing the questions that we typically get in usability and comparing that with the usefulness testing. Starting in with transactional applications where they're going through a process in order to accomplish a task. And what we have here is an example from a piece of CAD software. And in this particular example, for usefulness, it's not so much can they accomplish the task. It's not can they add this particular thing to this thing. Does it align with their expectations? Does it have the features that aligns with their workflow? In this particular example, the company was changing to a ribbon interface. And they wanted to make sure that the ribbon interface aligned with the expectations of these very advanced users who have been using this piece of software for years. And they knew all their keyboard shortcuts, they knew exactly which menus to go to, and by putting in this ribbon, there's the possibility of just completely breaking that and interrupting their workflow. So we have to learn if it's interrupting their workflow, does it have the features that they want? So it's not so much about, in usability, it's all about finding the interruptions in the workflow. What's stopping them from accomplishing their goals? And this is usability. Usability problems stop us from accomplishing tasks. But in usefulness, it's going to be different. It's more foundational research. What can we find out about the user's mental models so that we can restructure this application to align with their workflow? So it's not so much can they get from point A to point B, it's what is their mental model for this workflow, and let's make sure that when we're designing this piece of software, it aligns with that mental model. The next idea is where to position certain things. Now I know the first thing that's going to pop in a lot of your minds, hey, you just asked the participant to design for you. That's not what we're saying. It's all about gathering data, right? So, as they're using this application and clicking through a prototype of some nature, where can we put in, for example, help icons, or where should the hoverovers be? What's missing from this that will make it align with what you expect? And then finally, the personalization aspect, and this is becoming more prevalent these days because a lot more websites and even applications are becoming more personalized. Either you're logging in or you're setting some settings and they're saved. So what level of personalization would be appropriate for this application? And again, this is not usability questions. These are more foundational. How do you expect the system to work? What can we do to make it align with your expectations? So that's in the transaction. Again, in the transaction, in usability, it's getting from point A to point B. In usefulness is, all right, what can we add to this in order to make it align with what you expect? What do you want out of this system? What features do you need? Almost sounds marketing. I dare say. So moving on to another type of application. So we just talked about transactional. This next one is more about content and a little bit of IA even. So in this particular example is variety. And in this, when we show a participant this type of screen, again, we're not asking them, can they get to the music? That's more of a usability question. What we're asking is really, how does this align with how they expect to absorb this content? Are these too many bullets? Can you not parse that well? Do you have all the tools here that you need or want in order to have an appropriate sharing and so forth? Are the ads too intrusive? Really more foundational questions. Again, almost marketing questions. And we're kind of blurring the line between marketing and usability a little bit. But in a transactional, it's going to be different questions than in this more content-oriented application. So in usability, in a content application, the questions that we get are, all right, can they traverse the site in order to get to where they want to get to? Again, task-oriented. Can they get to where they want to go? The links, this is where the IA aspect comes in. Do the links make sense? When you click on music, do you get what you expect? Can you find this one song or something like that? Again, more getting from A to B. And then the layout. So does this layout align with how you expect to absorb this content? Are we missing sections? Are there superfluous sections? So what do you need? What do you want when you're coming to this type of site? Again, more foundational, less goal-oriented. So in usefulness, so as I was just talking about, which content is missing? What do they expect when they come to the site? What is superfluous? Talking about branding. Again, that goes back to marketing. Is there too much branding on the site? Is there too little branding on the site? Do you not know what site you're on? That sort of thing. And how does this either add to or detract from your experience while on this content site? Promotions and interstitials. So when you're on a content type site, the company probably wants you to click on the ads. They want you to look at the ads. They want the ads to be relevant, so you will click on them, so that they'll get more revenue, or they'll inform you about a given service, that sort of thing. So what's the appropriate level of promotion and interstitials? Are they interrupting you of reading this content or getting to the right content? And then finally, personas. So different types of people are going to be coming to this content site. Does it speak to all these different personas? So we can bring people in who fulfill a certain demographic and see, does it speak to these different personas? And let's see where the deltas are so that we know how to speak to our different constituencies. Moving on to social media.
Gaming here.
Gaming. Right. He's doing social media. So this is gaming. So what are the things that make game sites or even games useful? Again, in usability, it would be, can they go and play the game? Can they accomplish the tasks on the game? Is the game playable? But we take a step back in usefulness and say, all right, on this page, what are the things that are going to draw people in? In a gaming site, we want people to play the game. We want them to share information. We want people to bring their friends in. We want them to be intrigued by the high scores, signing up and doing all the quizzes and the games. We want them to really interact with the site. So what information can we gather in order to make them want to interact with the site a lot more? So in this particular example, all right, are the high scores interesting to you? Do you want to get up there, and why? Why would you want to get up there? Are the buttons too big? Can you notice the cache, the points? And is that something that you would use? Is that something that's salient to you? So if we make this gaming site with all these points and signing up or high scores, but we bring users in and they don't find any value in that, then they're not going to use the site. So all right, let's take a step back, bring people in, and find out what their values are that will make them play these games, possibly share these games. So, as I mentioned in usability, it's really, can they play the game? Is it the appropriate difficulty level? Are they having too many problems playing the game, or can you advance through the levels no problem? That sort of thing. And then the ability to understand the controls of the game. Are they using all of the controls in the game? Are there things that they don't really understand? Again, more task-oriented, because those controls allow them to play the game and accomplish the task of winning the game or just playing the game. But in usefulness, it's not so much can they play the game, but what's the appropriate level of, say, point gathering? If I'm only getting 10 or 20 points for every game, but the prizes are at this level, it's going to take me X amount of time. Oh, that's going to take me too long. All right, so let's increase the number of points that you get. So how are people going to interact with this? Again, what are their core values? What's going to make them want to get on the site and play? And then the use of social media in the game. Will they share it with them? What will make people share a game with their friends? Again, if we get to their core values and make them align with the game, they'll probably be more apt to share it. And then finally, like I mentioned earlier, the ads and interstitials and registration. So are the ads intrusive? Is it interrupting your gameplay? Would you not register for various reasons because you have privacy concerns or something like that? Again, on the registration front, it's not so much can they get through the registration process, it's what would stop you from registering? What would make you register? That sort of thing. Again, getting to the core values of what people want to get out of these things so that we can make applications that people want to interact with. I'm going to turn back to Mike.
Yeah, a couple more scenarios or kind of instances of this. Is this screen making everybody feel like they had something bad for lunch? No? Okay. As Dan was mentioning, this plays out in a number of different kind of types of design or types of sites or applications. Social media is another one. What we found in working with people on social media sites is that their questions are about not kind of the mechanics of posting comments or reacting to threads or finding things, but about what type of content is relevant, how much the company should be involved or not involved, that type of thing. So these are, if the goal is usability, if we're looking at that, our goal will be to assess if users can figure out how to use it, how to find the things they're looking for. Usefulness, some of the things on this project in particular, we wanted to seed the site with some topics, what's relevant, what's compelling. We wanted to, like I said, understand the involvement of the sponsor, the brand, how much of the brand, so that was a waste management site, there's a little bit of brand in there, but it does have its own kind of separate thing, which was intentional. And you can imagine the same thing in consumer-generated content or user-generated content, reviews, things like that. What should we give them as parameters? So those are not kind of usability goals, they're broader than that. Another implementation is, Dan talked about content or informational sites. Other types of things we work on are more kind of persuasive marketing sites. So the intention of this one is for McKesson, which is a healthcare company. They're speaking to home health agencies, trying to get them to buy their software, right? So if we were to assess this for usability, we'd be looking for confusing language, assessing any calculators that people have, kind of mechanics of registration or contact forms, etc. But really the questions that they had for us were not about that. I don't want to say that they assumed that, and having a usable experience is not important, it is, but their questions were different for us. Their questions were like, which messages and which images together are going to be the most compelling, right? How is this going to reflect on our brand? Or how does this compare to our competitors in terms of, is it going to convince them? Or what elements can we have on the page that's really going to persuade somebody to take that final step of registering? Those are the questions that the business had for us. So we give those as examples of things that we've heard. I would think that this might be kind of somewhat familiar to you guys as user experience professionals, and not usability specialists in particular. So what we've seen happen is we fall back on things that we know and methods to kind of answer all these types of questions. So a natural reaction is turn to something that looks like usability testing, right? We recruit people, we get into the room, we're all people, right? We like to talk to people and qualitatively kind of understand what's going on and really get into the heads of people, users, what's going on. So we turn to usability testing, kind of what we know. One of the things that you might be thinking is, well, are you not talking about, you're talking needs analysis here, you're talking market research. So maybe we shouldn't be just defaulting to usability testing. And we say yes, but Oftentimes we live in a in real world, real budget kind of situations where we don't have a lot of time, where we need to get into something and have something delivered. Also, it's helpful to have, we found that to kind of speed the process along or kind of get at these kind of questions, it's helpful to have participants or users that we're talking to actually react to something. So you go to somebody's desk and kind of ask them their workflow and kind of try to gauge kind of their pain points outside of the context of kind of any ideas or proposed designs that you have. You're not going to get as much if you, in our experience, is if you have some type of design artifact with you. So our goal, our challenge, or what we were trying to come up with in the genesis of this talk, is to say, how can we leverage what's good about usability testing and recognize the heritage of usability testing, recognize the strengths of talking to people and qualitatively assessing what's working and what's not, but be cognizant and aware of the actual goals that we're trying to get out of whatever study that we're doing. So we're going to talk about next what we've started to do to get at some of these questions and kind of the format. So.
All right, so let's take a step back here and really compare usability with usefulness. Okay. So what we have here are the steps of these two types of studies. In a traditional usability study, we have the pre-task questions, the actual tasks, and then the post-task. This is really just the formula that we typically use. And for usefulness, we have applied that same formula, but we're taking different tacks throughout. So first off, let's start with the pre-task questions. Good place to start. In usability, these are typically more demographic type questions and gauging a person's level of expertise. And the goal here is to make sure that our groups are going to help, that we have the right groups and that we're going to classify our results. Sometimes we ask these questions and they don't get incorporated into the report, or they are used in order to segment the data. It can be willy-nilly sometimes. But in usefulness, we're changing this around. We want to get them in the mindset of doing an evaluation of usefulness. So we want to get them thinking about what their core values are, what they want to get out of this type of site or application or whatever it is that we're throwing in front of them. And we want to know about their task flow. So we're going to ask some of those foundational questions about workflow and task flow. If they're current users, tell me about your pain points or the things that you like. So we know that going in. And then we can probe on those later. And then also some scenarios. So how would you use this application and why would you use this application? So we really want to get into the mindset of evaluating the usefulness, not so much the demographics and chunking of the data that they're showing us. So moving on to tasks. In usability, these are typically predefined tasks based on business goals. We work with the business partner to determine what those goals are. We take those scenarios and turn them into tasks. Of course, non-leading tasks. And we work very hard to have those non-leading, and we want to have them short, but we want to have it guide them in the right way. And again, this is obviously a very valid way of doing it if you're looking for usability problems. And sometimes we don't use predefined tasks. Sometimes we do have the users make up their own. But that's, again, it's typically defined problems. And we ask questions, but again, minimal moderator intrusion. We want to stay silent while the user thinks aloud. And our goal here is really to find usability problems. Time on task, pass-fail rate, and so forth. How many people actually got through it. Again, we're throwing qualitative and quantitative data against usability problems. But that's not what we're looking for in usefulness testing. Usability testing is for usability problems. Usefulness testing is to get at those core values. So we're going to emphasize more participant-directed tasks instead of the contrived tasks. So in the pre-test task questions, when we're talking about their typical workflow, we can then say, all right, now go do that. And there is a caveat there in that you have to make sure that your prototype can support this. But as usability experts, we can talk around that as best we can because Lord knows we never have a fully functioning prototype. So we can talk around that if need be. But by using these participant directed tasks, we're going to find out how this design, as it stands in the prototype, aligns with their mental model, with the workflow that they expect. And yes, we can have some contrived tasks, but we really feel that having the participant-directed tasks makes it more real-world and more aligns with how they expect to use the system. And then moving on to the post-task questions. So in usability, we typically talk about levels of satisfaction and levels of ease even. So give me a rating of 1 through 7 on how satisfied you are with completing that task, of how easy you thought that task was, and so forth. Was there anything that was ambiguous here? Again, all going back to the usability problems. Was there anything that interrupted your task flow? And overall, we're measuring usability there, either qualitatively or quantitatively, depending on your method. But in usefulness, we want to do a little bit more comparison. We want to compare those expectations with the actual experience. And actually, expectations is a big word here. I think it's going to be very important for usefulness testing that we talk about throughout this entire study. So in pre-task questions, it's all right, what do you expect the system to do? During the tasks, did that align with your expectation, or actually the post-task? Did what happened align with what you expected to happen? No? All right, well, why not? Let's talk about that. And the other half of that in the post-task questions is to walk the users through the task again. So, all right, press the back button a couple of times and walk through the task again, interrupting them. So the first time around, you're going to stay silent and just watch what they're doing, letting them think aloud. But the second time around, let's bring them back there and take a look at what we just did. What was confusing about this? So you just did this search. Did the search result table have all the columns that you need? What columns are missing? That sort of thing. Again, it's aligning their expectations with the way that the system works and gathering as much data in order to inform the design. Yeah.
So I'm sure, especially those who have done a lot of testing, have some ideas around this, and we'll get to that in a minute. We'll have plenty of time for discussion. But we thought it would be a good idea to give you an example of what we're talking about here. And Dan talked a lot about what do you expect and kind of how does this align with your expectations. I just want to be clear on that what we're talking about there is not asking the participant to design this for us. Having them kind of compare their expectations to their end result is really just a different way to inform us as designers about what might be useful or not useful. The idea is not to ask them what would you want or expect and specifically do that thing, add that field or whatever, but it's a means to an end. So as I mentioned, here's an example. We had a project for a financial services company that had an application for small businesses to do banking. And they had an existing application and getting relatively low marks for the user experience, right? Whatever, they started to hear, that their competition was surpassing. Their overall goal, as we came to find out, was in a month, they had a big customer meeting, a sales meeting, they had a customer advisory board, all happening at the same time. In a month, they needed to kind of envision a totally new experience. Something that would help them leapfrog their competition, show innovation, show their commitment to user experience. And there was a lot involved in that with regards to personalization, brand, etc. So we looked at the situation, and before we heard about the 1-month deadline, we said, well, maybe we'll take what you have today and let's do a usability test, right? Find where the problems are, because we can fix those problems and improve it. So then we learned about the 1-month deadline, and we said, and the goals of being kind of completely new and innovative with this, and said, that's really not going to get us kind of at the value and the usefulness that you're looking to show. So if we were to do the usability test, our goal would have been take what they have watch people use it, find where the usability problems were, and fix them. So we would have kind of found out kind of who they were with regards to the size of their business, etc. We would have had pre-defined tasks based from the product team, and we would have used this as an opportunity to measure some baseline satisfaction so that we could show improvement later on. But we decided not to do that. We decided to do something different. We decided to take all the ideas that the project team had, the business had, customer service, etc., and quickly mock up a few things that were totally different. Right? We would have liked to have gone out and done some type of contextual inquiry, do some persona analysis, kind of understand really what's motivating people and what's driving people, maybe some task analysis about what's different for different audiences, and really build from that. But we only had one opportunity to go out to and have user involvement, and that was a stretch. So we had one opportunity. So we decided to skip the contextual inquiry or ethnography part of it, get into some ideation pretty quick so that we had something and all these ideas started to get on paper, and go out and do this kind of modified usefulness testing, whatever we want to call it, with the audience. So we took some ideas and sketched them out and went out to people, and we structured this with still 1 hour sessions, 60 to 90 minutes. We spent a fair amount of time at the beginning, 20 to 30 minutes of intense interviewing and kind of needs analysis type of questioning, all that served to set the user's mindset for expectations about what would be really valuable, what would really help them. And that way they were really primed to, when we showed them something, they were really primed to give feedback to say, no, that's not what I was thinking, but now that I see this, this would work because of X, or it wouldn't work because of Y. An example that's really hard to get at, I think, in usability testing is the big idea here was personalization. So the idea was that different companies are different sizes, they have different roles, they do different banking activities. And so their current application just gave everything to everybody in a set of tabs, and it was hard to navigate and hard to use. So the idea would be, well, we want to personalize this, right? So there's the ability to personalize. But as a team and the business had a big question, like, how many people really personalize things for themselves? So what, of this audience, are they really going to set their eye Google and play around with portlets and different things like that? And if this is the same thing, should we do that? Or what level should we give them? What granularity should we have? And to get at that, we really wanted to kind of do that expectation setting up front, needs analysis up front, compare that to their experience, and learn from that to build. So that's what we did. So we do have some time for some questions. I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, these are, we've been hearing these questions. We have this kind of background in usability testing and want to leverage it, but we recognize that some things are different. So this is the first pass at trying to understand and modify the techniques to get at some of the questions that we're answering. We're not saying that usability is not important. It is. We wave the flag for usability as much as anybody. I'm not saying that contextual inquiry and ethnography and foundational research is not important. Again, we're waving that flag as high as anybody as well. But different situations call for different techniques and adaptability and flexibility in the methods that you choose. So I think with that, one just logistical question. We have the slides posted on SlideShare, so if you want to get these full slides, it's not in the proceedings deck. We say it's to save paper, but really we weren't done with the deck, so we have to be honest. So appreciate it. Looking forward to some questions. Don, you had your hand up first.
All right. So, two questions. I'm a little confused because, and maybe because the examples chose. So, when we're saying usefulness, do we mean will they use it? The question is, will they use it? Or the question is this thing engaging? For example, a calculator is very useful, right? but it may not be the most engaging thing. Whereas Angry Birds may not be very useful. It's very engaging. So which of these sites are you ending up at when you're trying to define usefulness as a practice?
Do you, in your work, do you get both of those questions?
Possibly.
Because I think what we're thinking is that we get both, right? And so, the actual questions that you ask might be a little bit different, but kind of structurally, how you might set up one of these studies, this is what we're thinking. So the question is both. Does that have an implication?
Yeah, I think so. The question is, will they use it? And that's a very tough question to ask for any UX professional, right? Because we work with what we have, and the market is what the market is, and it's very difficult to predict. So, from a strategy perspective, my experience, this is just a basic one, has been not to get too much into answering the question of will they use it, because that you can only do, for example, if the context is web, you can only do it with an A/B test, for example. But test it out. They'll use it. They'll use it. Is it engaging? That's something that you can get at, and through a methodology that's closer to usability. So if you're ending up on the side of that, then I would say this has legs.
Okay.
But if it's the question of will they use it, that's a large quantity question.
It's a tough question, and I would advise anybody when they're in the study asking that question: will you use this? What do people say? Yeah, this is cool. I'll use it. Right? That's not gonna help. Yeah. Grace.
Could you talk a little bit about, do you guys use some different feature prioritization techniques with the users kind of helping rank which ones are the most useful? If you're using like a monopoly kind of game or some other type of ranking?
Yeah, we haven't done like a monopoly game type thing, but that has come up a bunch. And that's typically handled in the post-test. So all right, in this particular section, we're thinking about having these features. And so we can either list out the features and have them rank how important that feature is to them, as well as what other features do you need in there. So that's typically done in the post-test, not so much during the tests.
And have you been able to follow with your clients if it happens that way, as far as if those things actually got scoped in and launched with?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those are complex because you have life cycles of products and you have kind of things that get scoped out. But I think that more than anything, all those types of things help inform kind of the design decisions, especially with stakeholders who they'll ask like, should we brand this as waste management or should we brand it as something else? And of course, everybody has their different opinions, and so these types of techniques just help to kind of settle some of those arguments. So. We'll go with Steve here. Yes?
Yeah, sort of two things about it. One, I would think you have to be pretty harsh in the post-test questions about where they are saying, yes, I really like this. Yes, this is a great idea. The same way when users come up with suggestions for features. I mean, I find that if you then ask them, okay, how would that work, and you let them talk through it, by the time they're done, they say, well, actually, I'm probably using the way it is now. 90% of the time. So I assume you're being fairly rigorous on that because you don't want the people who are observing the test, if there are people observing the test, to say, oh, they really love the personalization.
Right.
But what I was curious about was, in the example that you were using, can you tell us any more about, is there any more you can tell us about how that worked out? I mean, I'm curious to see what the sort of end game is with this. I think it's a great idea. But, like the personalization, they carry personalization off on their shoulders.
Well, I think it's, so two parts to that. First of all, I want to make sure that in this kind of survey of tasks and what's important, that's not the essence of what we're talking about here. I think this kind of comparing somebody's kind of, you build them up to set expectations about in their own mind what would be really cool for them and helpful and useful, and you watch the comparison of kind of how that actually played out or not is the more kind of salient part of this. With regards to that, this is an example of how it worked. You can envision we were talking to people at a small business who their job is to do reconciliation reports every morning of like the 500 checks that they sent and payments that they put out yesterday, and that role is all they do, right? And so they built up in their mind when we interviewed them at first. That's what they do, and that's everything that they did. And we knew kind of from analytics and experience that the current site did not really support them in that way. And so you could really see the look on their faces when they saw that kind of modular aspect we have. They say, here's your one module, and you can have, if you just do 2 things a day, and you can see their faces light up and say, yeah, it's not, yes, I would use that, but it's like the reaction of kind of how engaging it is. I guess it's kind of a soft thing, but that helps.
And also one other thing to address your rigor question. One thing that we didn't really mention was maybe possibly the use of laddering in order to get at that rigor. Okay, you want this feature, well, why? And then just keep asking that question in order to find out what that core value is. So they may be asking for a feature, but they really may be asking for something else.
Got a lot of questions right here.
Well, I'm in an environment where it doesn't matter if it's engaging or will they use it. They have to use it. When I'm trying to show them, it's an application, and I'm trying to make sure that they get the things done that they need to do. But one of the problems that I really struggle with is what's missing. What haven't we thought of that we need to provide for you in order for you to get the work done? How would you get that into this kind of usefulness testing situation?
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the core questions that we're going to be asking throughout in the pre, post, and during the task is what's missing and what's superfluous. What information do you need in order to accomplish your task easier, or to absorb the content easier, that sort of thing. And also on the superfluous side, do we have too much in here that's distracting you from getting at the core stuff that you want? So when we run these, the question, what's missing, is asked a lot.
I would also add on to that, and we're not proposing that this is some like magical method here, right? And we're kind of trying to get our heads around what this all means. As I found myself naturally doing this, to your question, I found myself when somebody's kind of using something, I found myself really challenging them. Not being competitive necessarily, but challenging them like, hey, remember you said back here that your job is this? Really press them. Like, you get a lot in traditional usability testing. I try to get through something and you ask them that, how would you rate that task 1 to 5? Oh, that was pretty good. I got through it, no problem, right? But if you really challenge them along the way and kind of point holes in your own design, and kind of be on their side to say, hey, but didn't you say this? This shouldn't be working for you, right? Or, what's going on here? So it's a softer thing again, but I find myself challenging. So right in front.
Michael, we've been actually doing something very similar, basically combining usefulness and usability testing with some of our newer products. We do application design and development. And where I really find this shines is through an iterative design process where I wouldn't say rapidly, just due to our extended timelines, but going through multiple design iterations over a course of a period of time. And it almost becomes like a participatory design exercise where we are doing usability testing, can they complete a task, but also we're trying to elicit and trying to gauge, does it match their mental model? And that's where I really find this to shine is, I almost think of it as in if you're doing something in more of an agile fashion, you're doing that testing at the end of each cycle. And it's kind of like, that is that testing. Are we meeting the mark?
Yeah.
So
one of the things that we didn't include in here was, you can imagine that this works best earlier in the process rather than later. Just before it goes out the door, you're trying to get the last refinements in. That's a usability testing thing. As we mentioned, usability testing is still important, but especially early on in the process. So there's lots of hands up. I would love to continue this conversation, Dan as well. But I also don't want you to get stuck in the hall here, so I'm going to let you go. But thank you guys so much for your time.